what practical advice do you have for them to be better at delegating, to really master this idea?
Sure. And I'm sure you could probably ask a lot of different senior leaders and you'd get a lot of answers, but I think some of the things would be very similar. And I think it's a great way to share this information, through the podcast, because I had to kind of learn it on the fly.
Yeah.
I had to learn it, that it was important that, my tasks were overwhelming at times, and I
Sure.
wasn't always getting done the things I needed to do. And I think kind of, if you think about a 5-step process, and you could vary it whatever fits for your mode of operation, but starting out with knowing who you are as you move
Mm-hmm.
up to different positions. Are you a micromanager like I was? Okay, I've got to watch that myself. I'm the only one that can fix that. Or am I, too much delegated, to where I don't know what's going on in the organization? You got to find that balance, and it really starts with knowing who you are.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is your mission. What is your mission? And it goes back to, what we've been talking about is, what do I have to accomplish to do my mission? What can I do, and what can go to others? So, knowing yourself, knowing the mission. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky at times. What are the things when we say that only I can do, that I must do to do my mission, but what will pull me down? I've got to be aware of those. And it may be something very tactical that you're going to delegate, but then all of a sudden you got to be up to speed quickly because it's hit the press. And how are you going to handle that? Thinking through that ahead of time. And how are you going to understand when that happens? Who's going to tell you? So those are the first three. And then the next one is you got to empower that staff. You can delegate, but if you keep watching over their shoulder, they won't feel empowered. So that's probably the fourth one, is making sure they know they have been empowered and here are their bounds. If it hits this trigger, you need to pass it up to the next level, or at least make sure I'm aware. Other than that, you make the decisions. And the whole thing is then trust but verify. And I go back to Ronald Reagan. I think this was actually a Russian proverb years ago. And but Ronald Reagan said, "Trust but verify," and that goes along with the visits. You're out there, you're verifying the missions. You're hearing from the soldiers. Maybe there's something they don't have that they need, or you're within your organization. So, and I think trust but verify also gives you more confidence to do more delegation.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of the 5 things that I would think about.
Yeah, I think those are excellent. I really like the way that you brought those together. I think certainly in that moment, I'm learning. Part of this is so I can continue learning as well as helping other people learn and develop. But so that's definitely good. As I was thinking about it, and what are the things out there in the literature that people have identified and so forth. There are a few more that I can add from the science. One, and we hit on this already, but I like to bring it all together for folks who are listening so they have action items. Determine the right people with the necessary competence. And that goes back to your very first example where you're talking about that. The second is, we talked about this, set clear expectations. If you don't tell people what you want to do, want to have happen, you were talking about it in the form of the mission. Know what the mission is. Tell them what the mission is and set the expectations. Another thing that is out there in the literature is don't delegate the negatives and keep all the positives. When people see that, then they feel like you're dumping on them, like we were hitting on. And so an example might be, don't make everybody else deliver bad news. There are some people in positions who would say, hey, you're the person who fires everybody, right? And that's just not cool. That's not a good thing to do. And so that's really a negative. The fourth thing is delegate things that actually fall into people's roles. You don't want to give people something to do that is outside their skill set or their role or things like that, because then that sends a message that bad on a lot of levels. So that's not a good one. We talked about empowering your people, and that really means give them the resources, the authority. People, when I did the study of you all, the 4 stars, so often I heard delegate authority, retain responsibility. So if you give them all the things that they need, authority and so forth, to get the mission done, if something goes sideways, that's on you. You keep that, because that's really important. The 6th thing was, and this as a person who is a self-proclaimed micromanager, engineer, this might be one to think about. Be willing to let go of perfection. It's okay if they don't do it exactly like you would do it or things like that. If it gets done, that's really valuable. And then the 7th one is limit the potential consequences to your people. Again, that gets back to this idea of delegate authority but retain responsibility. Any thoughts on any of those, sir?
Wow. Yeah, no, that is right on track. I think the one thing in today's world, and I probably need to put a lot more thought to this over time, but the context of what we're dealing with in today's world, because of the mass media and immediate information, is weeding through a lot of that and protecting your staff part of the, taking responsibility. And I think even in your book, you talk about how in some cases when things did go bad, even though they had delegated responsibility, the blame came to the top guy, and that's who it always should
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
But you got to realize the context of the world today has changed. I would say a little C for context when I started my career, because you can mess up and you can fix it and move on. Well,
Yeah.
today something very, I mean, a private could do something in the streets of America
Right.
that would immediately send a signal all the way through our government and internationally.
Yeah.
And you got to keep that in the back of your mind. And then you got to make people, because I think we're growing a society, some of these folks that do understand context, and they're afraid to make a decision because they know, hey, it might be on the nightly news.
Sure.
And how do you take that and make sure you just got to move on. If it goes bad, I'll take it for you.